Exercise 15. Collective bargaining. Bilateralism and public management. Students who have completed the preceding 5 exercises may have come away with the impression that public personnel administration is an activity dominated by white-collar managers in business suits who, after careful and dispassionate analysis, issue edicts that determine the shape and structure of an organization's personnel system. Although there is perhaps some truth to this picture, there is considerably less now than there was before the 1960s. Public personnel management is typically no longer unilateral management. That is, no longer, or at least less often, can personnel managers simply write rules and regulations, set compensation levels, or make other significant decisions that affect public employees without considerable consultation with those employees. The extent of such consultation varies widely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, to be sure. But as a general rule, public workers across the nation have organized into unions or associations and negotiate working conditions with school boards, city and state governments, and other public employers. The decade beginning in 2010 has seen some political and legal efforts to limit unions, but public employee organizations have not gone away. Where necessary, they have shifted their tactics and their focus. The interface between collective bargaining and the personnel management tasks covered in the preceding exercises is framed by the scope of bargaining permitted by federal or state laws. Some jurisdictions, for instance, allow employees to bargain over position classification, others permit bargaining about the system of performance evaluation to be used and determine whether employees can appeal a poor rating on a performance evaluation. Many state and local governments allow employees to bargain over wages, salaries, and fringe benefits. The federal government continues to prohibit bargaining over these issues. Other items that often fall within the scope of bargaining agreements are work schedules, disciplinary procedures, grievance processes, training and promotion opportunities, and union security provisions, dues checkoff, exclusive representation rights, use of public facilities for union activities, etc. Thus, human resource administrators and other public managers increasingly need to recognize that they work in a complex environment of bilateral authority. The tools and techniques of personnel administration must be adapted to this environment. The rise of public employee unions. Although public employee unions have been in existence in the United States since the 1830s, they did not begin to have a serious and continuing impact on public personnel administration until the 1960s. One reason was that state and federal governments either ignored public employee unions or placed heavy restrictions on their activities. These unions lobbied, but they did not negotiate contracts. It was not until 1959 that Wisconsin became the first state to pass a law requiring its municipalities to bargain with unions their employees organized. Even though a series of executive orders dating to 1962 conferred limited bargaining rights on federal workers, the federal government did not enact a statute protecting bargaining rights of its employees until 1978. Coverage has gone up and down. When the Department of Homeland Security was established in 2002, the federal government did not include employees in that department. In 2011, Wisconsin severely narrowed the scope of bargaining and restricted union organizing rights for state and local employees other than most police officers. Some other states, like Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, made similar efforts. A major objective was to limit the political power of public employee unions, which overwhelmingly supported Democrats. Nonetheless, these moves had a major impact on collective bargaining itself. 37 states have now passed laws authorizing some sort of collective bargaining with public employees. Most municipal, state, and federal employees today are covered by union contracts. Despite the late start for public sector unions, a higher percentage of public than private sector workers are now organized. The bargaining process. Public sector bargaining, like private sector collective bargaining, is bilateral. This means that there are two distinct parties, employers and employees, involved in the bargaining. Hard, good faith bargaining between the two sides should produce an agreement, or a contract, at the point of equilibrium of their interests. Note, however, that public sector managers, especially elected officials and their appointees, may not always view union members as adversaries. After all, union members vote. This creates a complication that doesn't arise in the private sector. The first step in the bargaining process involves identifying the parties. In effect, it is necessary to answer the question, who's going to be doing the bargaining for whom? This is done by defining the bargaining unit. In some cases, all employees in an agency are lumped together in a single bargaining unit. In other cases, employees are grouped by occupation or position, clerical workers, technicians, prison guards, etc. Once bargaining units are defined, employees are allowed to vote on whether they want to be represented by a union and, if so, which one. Called a certification election, this process is usually overseen by a special state or federal agency charged with ensuring that workers are not intimidated into voting one way or another. Once a union is certified as the bargaining agent for the employees in a unit, it may, again depending on the laws of the jurisdiction, be allowed to collect dues or a fair share of representation costs from all employees in the unit. Efforts to weaken unions have included requiring annual certification elections, requiring majority support by all employees in a unit, not just those voting, and prohibiting governments from collecting dues on behalf of a union. Following certification, contract negotiations can begin. Typically, the union will assemble a negotiating team, drawn from specially elected, or selected, rank and file union members, union officers, and, occasionally, professional negotiators from the state or national union of which the local union is an affiliate. The union team will put together a list of contract proposals or demands and will meet with the corresponding team from management, which will have its own set of proposals. The management team may consist of top agency officials, labor relations administrators from specialized agencies, or combinations thereof. Through a series of face-to-face bargaining sessions, interspersed with private discussions within each team, the two parties seek to reach accord and to agree on the language of a contract. Once the parties have produced a tentative contract, each side must seek formal approval from its constituency. The full union membership ratifies the agreement for the employees, and a school board, city council, state legislature, Congress, or similar legislative body ratifies the agreement for management. A source of tension sometimes is that legislative bodies are typically distinct from the executive branch, and it is the latter that is present at the negotiating table. Thus, legislators feel like they are almost an afterthought in the bilateral bargaining process. And they usually are. Although collective bargaining is essentially a bilateral process between unions and executive branches, there really are three parties, unions, executive branch, and legislators, that need to agree before there is a contract in the public sector. Impasse resolution procedurism. Bargaining does not always produce contracts in a straightforward manner. Occasionally, the two negotiating parties are simply unable to come to terms. Such a stalemate is called an impasse. When an impasse is reached, several things can happen. First, employees may decide to strike or to take some other job action, work slowdowns, sick-outs, working to rule, etc. Although strikes by public employees are illegal in most jurisdictions, they are hardly uncommon. More often, attempts are made to resolve the impasse through third-party intervention. This refers to the intercession of a neutral and independent person into the stalemated bilateral negotiations. There are three main types of third-party intervention. The first and least intrusive of the three is mediation. The job of a mediator is to try to convince both parties to be more flexible and to return to serious bargaining. Lacking the formal power to impose a settlement, a mediator must rely solely on persuasion and his or her reputation as a fair and unbiased individual. The second type of third-party intervention, sometimes used when mediation fails, is called fact-finding. Like a mediator, a fact-finder is a neutral, disinterested person called in to help resolve an impasse. A fact-finder does not, as the term implies, find facts. He or she makes a recommendation based on a review of the proposals of each side. Usually, a fact-finder holds a formal hearing and then publicly issues a recommended settlement. The proposal of a fact-finder is not binding, but it is intended to place public pressure on the two sides to accept the recommendation and end the impasse. The third type of third-party intervention is arbitration. Arbitration differs significantly from both mediation and fact-finding in that an arbitrator has legal authority to impose a settlement. Actually, there are several varieties of arbitration. The first, often termed general binding arbitration, permits an arbitrator to review the proposals of both sides and then pick and choose among the positions of labor and management to create a contract the arbitrator considers fair. The arbitrator may, if he or she deems it necessary, write new provisions or even draft a new contract. The second and more common type of arbitration, final offer arbitration, item selection, limits the power of the arbitrator in an important way. Although he or she can still impose a settlement, the contract must be constructed from provisions actually proposed by one side or the other. The arbitrator may not exercise creativity and draft wholly new or compromised provisions. Many people believe that this limitation on the power of the arbitrator encourages labor and management to submit more reasonable and temperate proposals because they will fear that anything less than reasonable and temperate will drive the arbitrator to the position of the other side. The third type of arbitration is a variation on the second. Its name, final offer arbitration, package selection, effectively summarizes the difference. In this type of arbitration, the arbitrator must choose, without modification, either the entire package submitted as a last, best offer by management or the entire package submitted as a last, best offer by labor. This type of arbitration creates a high-stakes game for the two parties. Even more than with the item selection variety, each side knows that it must submit a moderate and reasonable last, best offer to the arbitrator. Anything less than that is likely to produce an unalloyed victory for the other side. Sentiment is strong among labor relations specialists in favor of bilateral negotiations. Third-party intervention is viewed as a last resort, something to be used only when labor and management are truly stalemated. Similarly, once it is determined that a third party must be called in to break an impasse, there is a bias in favor of the least intrusive intervention. One major reason is that labor and management, whatever their fundamental differences, share a long-term interest in coexistence. It is better for them to work things out for themselves than to rely on an outside referee. After all, there won't be a referee around on a day-to-day basis as the work of the organization proceeds through the year. Also, the third party is typically not a member of the community who will have to live with the consequences of the settlement in the same way that workers, managers, and legislators will. It is certainly better for labor and management to bargain their way to a contract, even if they have to use a mediator or a fact-finder, than it is to have one imposed by an arbitrator. Most people involved in labor relations believe that arbitration is useful only for preventing strikes. And even then, some would argue that strikes are to be preferred. Further reading. The literature on public sector labor. Overview of exercise. This exercise simulates a round of collective bargaining between the City of Barnswallow and the Barnswallow chapter of the International Federation of Firefighters, IFF. Playing the role of a member of the city's bargaining team, the union's bargaining team, or a neutral third-party mediator or arbitrator, you use the current contract between the city and the union as a baseline and attempt to negotiate a new agreement. Instructions. Step 1. Your instructor will assign to you one of the following roles in this exercise. H. Rodri. Classes larger than 10 students will subdivide into 2 or more sets of bargaining teams. Read the information about your role provided on Form 73A through 73J. Use the information provided as a general guide to behavior throughout the exercise. Feel free, however, to embellish your role as you see fit. Use your imagination. Step 2. Read through the provisions of the current contract, Form 74, and familiarize yourself with the characteristics of the City of Barnswallow, IFF Local 492, and the other background information provided on Form 75. Step 3. Meet with the other members of your bargaining team, and establish an initial bargaining position. Decide which provisions of the current contract should remain intact, which should be altered, and which should be thrown out. You may, if you like, propose entirely new provisions or even draft a wholly different contract. Each member of the bargaining team will probably have slightly different perspectives on what items to stress, what positions to take, and what overall strategy to adopt in dealing with the opposing bargaining team. Try to work out reasonable compromises. Students playing the role of mediator or arbitrator should await further directions from the course instructor. Step 4. Arrange a face-to-face bargaining session with the opposing bargaining team. Each side should present its demands and receive reactions from the other side. Step 5. Review the proposal submitted by the opposing team in a private session with your bargaining team. Reformulate your positions as you deem appropriate. Step 6. Arrange further bargaining sessions and conduct private meetings with your team as needed. Work to produce a new contract satisfactory to your team. Step 7. Once agreement between the two sides has been reached on all provisions of a new contract, each side should complete Form 76. Obtain appropriate signatures on Form 76, and present it to the instructor. Step 8. In the event that agreement between the two sides on all provisions of a new contract cannot be reached by the time specified by your instructor, an impasse will be declared. At this time, the two parties to your negotiation will be subject to one of several impasse resolution procedures: mediation, general binding arbitration, final offer arbitration with package selection, or final offer arbitration with item selection. Your instructor will inform you at the outset of the exercise which impasse resolution procedure governs your negotiations. Parties governed by mediation will return to bargaining with the intervention and assistance of a mediator. Bargaining will continue until a contract has been negotiated or time ends, whichever comes first. If a contract is successfully negotiated, complete Form 76, obtaining the required signatures. Parties governed by arbitration should read and follow Steps 9 and 10. Step 9. If an impasse has been declared and your parties are governed by any form of arbitration, each bargaining team is to complete Form 76 independently. This form now represents the last, best offer your team is willing to make with respect to each of the provisions under negotiation. Be sure to complete this form fully and carefully, especially the final section that allows you to add provisions or provide the full text of any altered provisions. You need not obtain signatures from the opposing team for this step. Upon completing the form, submit it to the arbitrator designated by your instructor. Step 10. After reviewing the submissions from both parties, the arbitrator will hold a hearing at a time designated by the instructor. At this hearing, the arbitrator will take testimony from both parties regarding their submissions. The arbitrator may raise any questions he or she likes about the submissions. Following the hearing, the arbitrator will review all materials, complete and sign a clean copy of Form 76, summarizing his or her judgment, and, at a time set by the instructor, announce this judgment. Representatives of both parties will then sign the arbitrated version of Form 76.